Good to have you with us. This is the Daily Report for Friday, November 26th. Global recovery efforts on the economic front are being challenged by shortages in manpower. We have more on this phenomenon later on the program. Let's start now with the global pandemic updates. I have Kwon So-ah standing by. So, how are we ending the work week here on the local front?
Sunny, just like last Friday, we are entering the weekend with more than 3,000 COVID-19 infections. But this Friday, it's a closer figure to 4,000 as 3,901 cases were tallied as of 12 a.m. And that is also close to 3,900 domestic transmissions alone. Now, if we go over to our graph, we see that, as I said, last Friday, we ended the work week with a little over 3,000 cases. But now we are at over 3,900, although it is a slight drop from the past 2 days. And in the capital Seoul, there is not a big difference from the past 2 days, with over 1,700 cases and 1,120 in Gyeonggi-do province, close to 250 in the city of Incheon. Meanwhile, there's also been a rise in Gyeongsangbuk-do province and Daegu, both now in the triple digits. With that, Korea has now a total of 432,901 infections and the same number of new fatalities here. 39 more people lost their lives, raising the death toll to 3,440. Now, moving over to the number of people that are in serious or critical condition, that's been also on the rise in the past days, now standing at a record high of 617. On the vaccination figures, we've got 42.4 million of the nation's population who got at least one COVID-19 vaccine shot, and more than 40.7 million people are fully vaccinated. Let's take a look at the global situation on the coronavirus front. We've got more than 578,800 new infections with over 7,100 fatalities. And if we take a look at the 20 countries with the highest accumulated caseloads, the U.S. is approaching 49 million, while the UK has hit a grim milestone of 10 million total infections. Meanwhile, here in South Africa, there's a new concern with a new variant having occurred. Last week, South Africa saw an average of around 200 daily infections, and now on Thursday, there were more than 2,400 cases reported. And those are the general updates I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
Right, so thank you for now. Health authorities here will make public their countermeasures in response to the recent rebound in daily infections and severe cases next Monday. For more on this, I have Choi Min-jung here in the studio. Min-jung, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Sunny.
Right, so Min-jung, essentially on this Friday, that is, authorities were supposed to share their new set, should I say, of restrictions to better contain the latest resurgence.
That's right. The delay comes as the authorities failed to reach a conclusion after Thursday's special meeting on the matter. But we do have some rough ideas on the changes that may be made. First of all, officials are planning to make vaccine passes valid for only around 6 months after full vaccination. This is mainly to encourage people to get booster shots as breakthrough infections continue to surge. And also, people under 18 may soon have to show vaccine passes to enter venues like singing rooms and indoor sports facilities. Officials have also considered making vaccine passes mandatory at restaurants and cafes, as well as reducing the cap on social gatherings. The government's delay in making the decision suggests that it's not an easy task, especially with strong opposition from small business owners.
Right, I see. And Min-jung, what's the latest regarding the booster shot campaign for the elderly here in the country?
Well, as of now, the goal is to complete booster vaccinations for people aged 60 and over in December. Authorities have been stressing again and again that it is crucial to speed up this process, as even those vaccinated are getting infected due to waning immunity.
Seniors aged 60 and above who are at higher risk should immediately get booster shots. Whether or not we can manage the medical system depends on the number of elderly people who have completed the booster vaccinations.
Because it takes around 4 weeks to form immunity after the additional shot, officials also say it's important to reduce contact with others during that time. And as of Friday, more than 2.2 million people in the country have received booster shots, with the majority administered to those aged 80 and above.
Right. And meanwhile, Min-jung, how is the vaccination campaign progressing for teenagers here in the country?
Well, the vaccination rates for teenagers are varying greatly by age. As of Thursday, 4 out of 10 children aged 12 to 17 have received their first doses, while 17% are fully vaccinated. If you look at 16 and 17-year-olds, 7 out of 10 have received their first shots, and close to half completed their vaccinations. But in the lower age group from 12 to 15, less than 2% have been fully inoculated. And data shows the lower the age, the lower the vaccination rate. And meanwhile, the risk of infection among students has increased with the resumption of full in-person classes. An average of 400 students are getting infected on a daily basis. And with this being said, authorities have extended vaccine bookings for teenagers until the end of this year. Those aged 14 and over may also register for surplus vaccines through Kakao or Naver.
Right, so surplus vaccines are also available for those aged 14 and above then?
Right.
Right, Minjung, thank you for now, but stay with us for the extended talk. Up next, Hua joins me back again with the latest COVID-19 remarks by health officials here in the country. Now, Hua, as Minjung just mentioned, priority has been placed on better protecting the elderly in Korea with booster shots. Do tell us more.
Sure, Sunny. So stressing the need to swiftly complete the vaccination for senior citizens at nursing hospitals and nursing homes, an official at Friday's COVID-19 government briefing said that starting today, 60 military doctors and nurses will be dispatched in helping out with vaccinations, and especially in the capital Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province.
Right. So if memory serves me right, the government had spoken of plans to complete booster vaccinations at nursing homes and nursing hospitals by this Friday.
Right. They had initially said by November 26th, which would be today. So although we do have a few hours left, it looks like there is a slight delay, with an official having said that by Saturday we expect the booster shots at those facilities to reach past 90%. Now, while the supply of vaccines at nursing hospitals is highly systematic, it is a difficult issue at other nursing facilities, including the lack of vaccination staff. And that's the reason for why the Defense Ministry has decided to help out with their additional medical personnel.
Right, and given that help, then this weekend we're likely to see a greater number of booster vaccinations taking place for the most vulnerable groups. And speaking of those at high risk, so how is our medical capacity as we speak?
Well, just like vaccinations, authorities are increasing the number of workers needed to treat COVID-19 patients. As a matter of fact, we did expand the number of ICU beds for those critically or severely ill patients, but that of course means more staff is needed as well. The government announced this Friday to dispatch 50 public health doctors to 21 Tier 1 general hospitals in the metropolitan region for 2 months starting today due to the recent increase in the use of ICU beds. They will be mainly in charge of treating critically ill patients. And in a bid to lower the burden on infectious disease hospitals, more residential treatment centers are to open, with some 2,000 additional beds to be secured in the greater Seoul area. As of this Friday, almost 73% of ICU beds are occupied nationwide. In the capital region, it's little under 85%. Currently, more than 1,300 confirmed patients are waiting for a hospital bed. These patients are being managed based on home recovery procedures, with emergency response on standby for 24 hours. Officials are also looking to put more emphasis on home treatment. Let's take a listen.
We're currently reviewing ways to make home treatment a fundamental pillar of our healthcare system, in line with our gradual return to normal. As of now, home treatment is offered on a selective basis only. In the future, we're looking to turn home treatment into a norm, while assigning patients who require further care to hospitals and residential treatment centres.
So it looks like a comprehensive expansion of venues as well as medical staff on a variety levels of treatment.
I see. Well, let's hope for some favourable outcomes through these latest efforts. Let's now take a moment to venture beyond national borders to South Africa. Researchers there have identified a new COVID-19 variant with an alarming number of mutations that has global health authorities on high alert. Here's Lee Kyung-eun.
A new coronavirus variant with an extremely high number of mutations has been detected in South Africa. It has 32 mutations on its spike proteins used by the virus to enter body cells and the target of most vaccines. A UK-based expert says this level of mutation could have come from a single patient with a weakened immune system, possibly an untreated AIDS patient. The new variant has some of the mutations seen in other variants, and there's some completely new mutations too. Richard Lessels, an infectious diseases expert in South Africa, said this means the virus could have enhanced transmissibility and the ability to evade vaccines. So far, the variant is still mostly concentrated in one province in South Africa, where 77 cases have been reported. However, there are 4 cases in Botswana and 1 in Hong Kong identified in a traveler returning from South Africa. Britain has yet to detect a case, but rushed to introduce travel restrictions.
So what we will be doing is from midday tomorrow, we will be suspending all flights from 6 Southern African countries, and we will adding those countries to the travel red list. Those countries are South Africa, Namibia, Lesotho, Eswatini, and Zimbabwe, and Botswana.
Amid much uncertainty, a WHO expert group will meet on Friday and will likely label the strain as a variant of concern or variant of interest. The strain is also likely to be named the new variant. They will also try to measure the variant's potential to drive new waves globally like Delta did. One thing to consider will be how well will this variant spread in countries with much higher vaccination rates than South Africa's 24%. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
Right, that was our Lee Kyung-eun with news about the new COVID-19 variant identified over in South Africa. And I now turn back to Soa to ask her, so how worried should we here in Korea be about this latest variant?
Well, Sunny, that question has been actually raised at the COVID-19 briefing earlier in the day. And there could be concerns here in Korea, too, because earlier when the Delta variant first appeared in India, Korea, it took some time before the variant has traveled into Korea. But now we are also seeing that the majority of infections are the Delta variant. So because of this concern, the Korean government is also monitoring the situation and said that it is waiting for the WHO's meeting results. So let's take a listen to an official on this latest issue.
The KDCA is part of the WHO's cooperative framework, so they will likely share with us any new information that they obtain, and also the results of their discussions. We don't know much about this variant at the present time, but we will be analyzing the information coming out of the WHO's emergency meeting and other sources while monitoring their effects.
And one of the concerns right now is that already we are seeing a case in Hong Kong. So this variant may have already traveled to other countries. So we will have to wait and see whether other countries are detecting this variant in the near future.
Right. And speaking about other countries, so let's extend our talk to include the US, where the resurgence is also quite severe, and also Europe. Start with the US for us then.
All right. So health authorities in the US are especially fearing a further resurgence over the Thanksgiving holiday, as tens of millions of Americans are expected to travel over this weekend across the country. And local data shows the average number of new infections during the past 7-day period was over 95,000, a 24% jump from 2 weeks ago. The number of hospitalizations also rose by 11%. The number of cases in the Midwest and Northeast has been rapidly increasing in recent weeks, with Michigan set to receive federal assistance to battle the surge there. Over in Europe, meanwhile, a grim milestone has been reached. 1.5 million COVID-19 deaths have been now accumulated there, as nations are grappling with a worsening crisis as the winter season sets in. One of the hardest hit countries, Germany, recorded an all-time high of close to 76,000 cases on Thursday. Germany's surge is partly blamed on its relatively low vaccination rate of about 69% compared to other Western European European countries like France, where 75% of its population has been vaccinated. However, France also is seeing increases lately and in response has launched a plan to provide booster shots to all adults and to shorten the interval between second and third shots from 6 to 5 months.
Right, just to add on to what Soa just said, even countries with high vaccination rates are bringing back stricter antivirus measures. If you take a look at Portugal, for instance, the country has one of the highest vaccination rates in the world, with more than 87% of the population fully vaccinated. But with cases hitting 4-month highs, the government has decided to roll back COVID-19 restrictions beginning December 1st. And people will need to show proof of vaccination when eating indoors at restaurants or going to the gym. And those fully vaccinated must also test negative for COVID-19 when going to high-risk facilities like bars and nightclubs. And remote work will also become mandatory, and students will return to school later than planned to avoid a holiday surge.
Right, and against that backdrop, Minjung, I understand drug regulators there have now approved, or recommending that is, shots, COVID-19 vaccine shots for children aged 5 to 11. Tell us more.
Right, Sunny, the European Medicines Agency has recommended smaller doses of the Pfizer vaccine for younger children. The drug maker said that its vaccine showed more than 90% efficacy among children aged 5 to 11. And with more and more children being infected in Europe, the EMA's nod may be critical in taming the spread. And the regulators emphasize that the benefits of the shots for young children outweighs the risks. The EU joins a list of countries, including the US, Canada, and Israel, that have given the green light for vaccinations to such a young age group. For older teenagers aged 12 to 17, the vaccine has been approved since May in Europe.
I see. All right, Minjung, as always, thank you very much for your input this week. And Soa, thank you for being with us. See you on Monday.
See you on Monday.
In our headlines at this hour, Prime Minister Kim Buk-yeom has urged for strategic collaboration on the Korean Peninsula, especially in the forestry sector and that of health amid the prolonged pandemic. Remarks to this end were shared virtually at the DMZ International Forum on the Peace Economy earlier on this Friday. Kim also highlighted the importance of promoting the peace process on the peninsula despite current challenges. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Kim Buk-yeom is also attending, virtually that is, the 13th Asia-Europe meeting, which began on Thursday over in Cambodia. Under the theme of strengthening multilateralism for shared growth, authorities from Asia and Europe are touching upon issues of universal interest, including COVID-19 and climate change during the two-day gathering. Cambodia, the current chair, says the talk seeks ways to ensure global peace, prosperity and productive growth. Lawmakers at the National Assembly recently weighed in on the ongoing dispute between content providers and internet service providers regarding the potential pay by the former to the latter for network usage. Our Kim Do-yeon explains.
The network usage fee discussion continues. Representatives from both sides, the content provider and internet service provider, made their claims at a roundtable discussion at South Korea's National Assembly, hosted by Deputy Speaker Kim Sang-hee from ruling Democratic Party and Kim Young-sik from the major opposition People Power Party. Netflix, who has been at the forefront of the network usage fee dispute in South Korea, repeated its claims of having no responsibility over the fees.
If somehow we would legitimate widely the concept of network usage fees, this means that any website anywhere on the internet would have to compensate any ISP network anywhere on the internet. This would lead to very paradoxical situations.
South Korean content providers are already responsible for network usage fees to local internet service providers of up to nearly $100 million a year. A representative for the local ISP said they do pay services outside of Korea as well to the content delivery networks such as Amazon.
When the content provider pays Amazon web hosting once, how it actually goes to the world doesn't matter. It goes out. That's the end. They're already paying.
The conversation also comes as Netflix's South Korean originals gained global attention, especially Squid Game and Hellbound.
If fees are somehow imposed in Korea, whereas outside of Korea, Korean ISPs actually pay to connect to the content, this may create a perverse incentive that content providers are discouraged from localizing in Korea and incentivized to locate outside of Korea.
While there are many stakeholders, it can seem confusing, but Professor Cho believes the idea is rather simple.
Whoever uses other people's resources should be responsible for the cost. Whoever profits from others' resources should be responsible for a reasonable amount of compensation. And whoever causes the cost should bear the cost.
One of the assembly members who proposed a bill regarding mandatory network usage fees said legislative procedure should be the last resort, and hopes that the situation is settled between Netflix and the ISPs themselves.
From our perspective, we have to pass this law in this regular session. And I hope everyone understands, as this is a must, considering it's related to being fair, a big issue in South Korean society today.
Currently, 4 members of the National Assembly have proposed bills to make network usage fees mandatory for foreign content providers. However, the legislative process is expected to spur a heated debate among members of the Assembly, as this will be the world's first such law. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, in other news, organizers of the Seoul International Marathon are making final preparations for their event this coming Sunday here in the capital city. Now, participants will be running between Olympic Park and Jamsil Stadium. Now, previously, some 35,000 people partook in the event, but this year, 38 athletes and 300 ordinary people will be running either the 42-kilometer full course or the shorter 10 kilometers. Traffic control will be in place along the marathon lanes from 7:50 to 11:30 in the morning on Sunday. For more information, do call 120, that is. Also, 7,000 people are poised to join the race virtually using GPS apps. Park Soo-keun was a self-taught contemporary Korean painter renowned for his depictions of rural men, women and children in mundane settings. Well, Seoul is hosting a retrospective in honor of his contributions to the local art world. Our Kim Bo-kyung was there.
A painter who paid careful attention to the lives of the ordinary people as they rebuilt their lives after war. Park Soo-keun developed his own unique painting technique of multi-layered, thick matière. Ever since his childhood, he dreamed of becoming an artist like Millet, but he had to study art on his own as getting a formal art education was an unthinkable luxury. His lenses spotted people nearby after the Korean War, and that made him an artist beloved by Koreans.
Park Soo-keun painted in the 1950s and 60s, and this is when artists were exploring the ways for Korea's modern art to develop after the Korean War. He used the Western tools of oil painting, but always tried to spot Korea's own objects, structure, and coloring.
Now there's a chance to delve deeper into his art. The artist's largest retrospective to date is taking place at MMCA Deoksugung Palace, presenting more than 170 oil and watercolor paintings. More than 30 pieces that have been donated by the late Samsung Group chairman Lee Gun-hee have been included, which made Park's oeuvre even more extensive.
3 Women is one of the donated pieces. After the Korean War, lots of men died or became jobless and sick. Women had to be the breadwinners, and the painting depicting them either having cigarettes or cupping their chins because they were struggling for sales.
His well-known works featuring a woman pounding grain and children with babies are at the center of the exhibition. Other masterpieces include those that went overseas after being bought by foreign buyers, such as Old Folks Chattering, which was bought by a professor at the University of Michigan.
His unique, thick matière technique is what first catches visitors' eyes. But if you delve deeper into his art, you'll realize how skilled he was in arranging elements in a bold but stable manner.
Barren trees take up the main space, a bold and daring attempt. But Park makes the structure stable with other elements such as people next to trees. Leafless branches make the paintings wintry, but as spring comes after the winter, it shows the artist's hope that one day a warm spring would come. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
It's Friday and time for a weekly review of events related to Korea making headlines elsewhere. I have Kim Sang-yeon with me as always. Sang-yeon, welcome back.
It's good to be back, Sunny. So this week we'll be talking about Korea's place in Bloomberg's latest COVID-19 resilience ranking. Also, we'll be looking into Samsung's mega deal from earlier this week of its new chip plant in Taylor, Texas. There was also an interesting piece on Korean younger women who wear hair curlers in public. And we have finally some more coverage of BTS and also the Grammys. So let's dive right in. Bloomberg has named Korea as one of the world's 7 MVPs in its handling of the pandemic. Bloomberg's COVID-19 resilience ranking has been tracking the best and worst places to be during this health crisis. It has weighed indicators among 53 countries for a year now by combining data ranging from case counts, death tolls, and vaccination rates to progress in reopening the economy. The 7 countries named as the MVPs are Norway, Denmark, Finland, the United Arab Emirates, Canada, Switzerland, and South Korea. All 7 had an above-average score in every indicator, whether it be rolling out vaccines, fighting the Delta, or reopening the economy. Bloomberg compiled a year's worth of data, zeroing in on the most consistent performers, who's done best on returning to normal, and where deaths have been most effectively prevented. Bloomberg suggested that observations over the past year indicate that past performance is no guarantee of future success or failure, considering the changing variables like the emergence of variants and vaccination rates. However, amid the changing fortunes seen in many parts of the world, a number of countries have shown continuing resilience, including Korea. Bloomberg says strong healthcare systems and societal cohesion, these are some of the common denominators in the 7 countries, qualities that worked to their advantage in every stage of the pandemic.
Right. Meanwhile, on the economic front, Sang-yeon, what has been the foreign response to Samsung's announcement of the site of its second U.S. plant?
Right,
chip plant, that is.
Yes, so this latest decision is actually one of the largest foreign investments being made in U.S. history. Samsung Electronics has decided to build an advanced semiconductor plant in the city of Taylor in Texas. So Bloomberg says that Samsung is hoping to secure more American clients through this latest move and narrow the gap with Taiwan's TSMC, which along with Intel has unveiled plans to spend billions on cutting-edge facilities globally. The new plant will augment Samsung's already sizable presence in nearby Austin, also in Texas, where it employs around 3,000 workers fabricating some of the most sophisticated chips manufactured in the U.S. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal says this mega investment by the Korean tech giant is also a win for the Biden administration, which is prioritizing supply chain security and greater semiconductor capacity on American soil.
Right. And on a light note, Sang-yeon, as you mentioned, there was a rather intriguing article on the New York Times about young Korean women wearing hair rollers.
Yes,
out in public.
Sure. Yes, you've seen some of them on the streets, and I'm sure you've seen photos of celebrities doing so. The New York Times, in fact, wrote that this may be a sign of changing ideas regarding gender and beauty, as well as a reflection of the country's generational divide. So many young women in Korea, especially in the capital Seoul, are now using old-fashioned hair curlers, which they lock tightly into their bangs. For many of these young women, according to the Times, appearance matters more at the final destination than on their way there. The paper notes that this is an attitude shared among many younger people who don't feel bound to the conventions that were once strictly observed in Korean society. Now, young people today may be less concerned about what other people think, choosing instead to live a more carefree, independent life. So these hair curlers may be more than just an accessory. but part of a broader shift among young women who feel they should be allowed to behave as they choose in public without having to follow common expectations about beauty and gender.
I see. All right, then. Right, let's end today's segment, Song-yeon, with BTS.
Yeah, so a lot of the foreign media outlets actually this week, they have been saying that BTS was basically snubbed at the upcoming Grammy Awards as they failed to secure a nomination in the big four categories despite a widely successful year with a series of chart-topping singles. The Los Angeles Times, for one, was surprised that global pop sensation BTS scored only one Grammy nomination even after releasing 3 #1 singles this year. During Tuesday's morning's live stream event announcing the 2022 nominees, BTS was excluded from the coveted record and Song of the Year categories, even though song Butter spent a whopping 10 weeks atop the Billboard Hot 100 chart. The snub was all the more surprising to U.S. media, particularly coming just days after BTS was named Artist of the Year at the American Music Awards. In any case, though, if it does bring a Grammy home, BTS would be the first Korean artist to sweep all 3 major U.S. music awards, including the AMA and the Billboard Music Awards. The 64th Grammy Awards will be held on January 31st of 2022.
I see. All right, Song-yeon, as always, thank you very much for that coverage.
Thank you for having me.
Labour shortages amid the prolonged pandemic are looking to affect long-term recovery efforts worldwide, and Korea is not an exception. For more on the causes, the consequences and potential countermeasures of this phenomenon, I have Professor Yang Jung-seok from Catholic University. Professor Yang, it's a pleasure to have you back.
Happy to be here.
I also have Professor Kim Se-won from Ewha Women's University. It's good to see you again, Professor Kim.
Thank you for having me.
Right, Professor Yang, let's begin with the shortage of truck drivers over in the UK and the US that have led to much chaos.
Okay, well, for the United States, it's not just truck drivers, but the unskilled workers are getting unfilled for some industries, and firms have offered even bonuses to fill these unskilled jobs, but they're not getting a lot of offers by these workers. Now, the U.S. September year-on-year wages rose by 4.2%. That's highest in at least 20 years. That's partially because of the labor shortage. And at first, it was thought that the labor shortage was due to spread of coronavirus, people frightened to work, go to work, and the strengthened unemployment insurance, which gave a lot of income. But those have disappeared. United States, they're not fully vaccinated, but still they're well on their way. But that still hasn't affected the labor shortage that much. The strengthened unemployment insurance has went away. And so in some states, it went earlier than the others, but almost all states have shown labor shortages. So what is the problem? Well, there has been some interesting speculation. One is that there's lack of childcare, so that the workers who are parents, they cannot go to their jobs, so they're not applying for jobs. A lot of people are sick and tired of current jobs. This applies to truck drivers as well. Truck drivers, supermarket workers, what we usually think of as relatively low-paying jobs. Those were classified as essential workers during the coronavirus, the worst of the coronavirus. A lot of people went to work at minimum wage or near minimum wage in these jobs, and a lot of them, frankly, died. And there has been some reflection on some of these workers, as well as in the press. Why should we risk our lives for minimum wage jobs? And it seems like a lot of people right now are turned off by those type of jobs, and they're seeking other opportunities while they can. And then because of the strengthened unemployment measures, a lot of these unskilled workers do have relatively high level of savings. So they might be sticking around and seeing what else that they can do. And then part of the problem is also immigration. A lot of these jobs, low-skilled jobs, are filled by people from Mexico or Latin America, but their movement has been restricted, not only because of the coronavirus, but even before because of the restrictions imposed by the Trump administration. So those jobs are impacting on low-skilled jobs, including truck drivers. Britain, the problem is similar, but it's worsened by Brexit because a lot of those drivers were European in origin. And also, a lot of the actual driving jobs were done by European drivers who are passing through Britain on their way from Europe to Britain and then from Britain back to Europe. But they also took up some routes from Britain to Britain. And now those have all disappeared because of Brexit.
Right, I see. And aside from the transportation industry then, Professor Kim, which other sector appears to be suffering quite a bit, or suffering perhaps the most in terms of labor shortage?
Well, as Professor Yang pointed out, in the U.S., there is a serious labor shortages in labor-intensive industries like restaurant, hotels, and agriculture, and so on. Also in UK, the gas crisis has been generated from the shortages of truck drivers who delivers all oil products to local gas stations. In Korea, we have relatively less serious situation on labor shortages, but it is said that agricultural industries and constructions are experiencing the shortages of the labor.
Right, I see. And Professor Yang, as you mentioned earlier, some pundits are indeed linking this phenomenon, labor shortage, to the pandemic, claiming that some workers are now using this opportunity to perhaps reassess their life priorities. What are your thoughts?
Okay, well, right now the United States is not fully out of coronavirus yet, so that is also impacting, I think, some areas. As I mentioned, lack of childcare is often mentioned as being a problem, but I think for some people, as I mentioned in the last question, they were shocked because of the coronavirus. They are seeking new opportunities, but we also have to remember that the United States is still undergoing a lot of the coronavirus problem. Their vaccination has stalled, and also it's relatively a new situation. A lot of people do have a lot of savings saved up, but once that savings goes away, they may reapproach their aspect. Right now, I think a lot of people, because they were so tired out by doing their jobs during the coronavirus and these so-called essential jobs, that they are looking for new opportunities. But before the coronavirus, these were unskilled jobs with perhaps too many workers who are trying to vie for these jobs. So it may go back to that situation eventually. But right now, we're sort of in the middle part, a transition part, where a lot of people who may want to come back to work cannot because of childcare or because of vaccination problems. And a lot of people who had done these jobs are just now so sick and tired of it that they don't want to go back. So we may be seeing a temporary phenomena. There's no reason to believe right now that all of these people who used to be truck drivers or restaurant workers will go out of those businesses. But for now, the United States does have shortage of workers because of these workers. A lot of these workers don't want to go back. And also, I should mention, there has been a large increase in demand for these items because the reduction of distancing has started the U.S. pent-up spending, so so-called revenge spending. So U.S. is undergoing a relatively large increase in demand, which is also contributing to this problem.
I see. Meanwhile, Professor Kim, here in Korea, our exit strategy from the pandemic has also led to our own challenges within the hospitality sector. As you mentioned earlier, workers are not returning to restaurants and cafes. So owners there are having quite a bit of problems. What more can you tell us about the causes and perhaps traits of Korea's own labor shortage?
Well, it looks that the labor shortage in Korea shares almost the same factors of labor shortage in UK and US. After the outbreak of pandemic last year, the supply of foreign workers is seriously decreased because the border is almost shut down over 1.5 years. And more importantly, the incentive to work to general worker is really weakened. For example, the gap between minimum wage and insurance, unemployment insurance payment, including government cash supports, is really, really tiny these days. So people, particularly young workers, temporary workers working in restaurants, hotels, and so on, their incentive to go back to work is really weakened. And for some educated and experienced workers who are working in the hardest hit industry, like airline companies, left the industry forever because they wanted to start their own business over a pandemic.
I see. Professor Yang, do tell us a bit more now about the potential repercussions of the shortage in manpower for the consumer and then perhaps for the economy as a whole.
Okay, well, for the consumer, it does mean a further increase in inflation. For example, we're experiencing a lot of increases in prices of raw materials. Coffee houses have raised the price of coffee and so on, but those, surprisingly, the cost of foodstuff for the restaurants, cost of coffee for coffee shops actually form a minority of the total cost. The major component is actually labor cost and the real estate cost, and both of them have gone up a lot during the coronavirus. So we may see a further increase in inflation as well. And then for the economy as a whole, until we work this problem out, we will probably continue to see the further reduction and shortage in jobs. But I should also mention that this is hitting very differently between different industries. We're facing a lot of shortages in, say, agriculture, very low-paying industries, or low-value-added industries, especially where you meet a lot of people, restaurants, tourism, and so on, partially because of the coronavirus, partially because of various restrictions. A lot of the jobs are really not impacted that much at all. For example, education, if you talk about education for elementary schools, junior high schools have been impacted a lot because you have to meet with those students face to face. But if you're doing your job through telecommunications, that hasn't been affected very much. So the impact will be very different industry to industry.
Right, of course. Now, Professor Kim, Professor Yang has mentioned that this particular phenomenon of labor shortage would be temporary. What are your thoughts on how long this labor shortage will last?
Well, it became very tough to answer that question, Sunny. When labor shortage started early this year, almost everyone expected that the shortage does not last long because workers were supposed to go back to paid job as soon as economic recovers. Actually, U.S. Federal Reserve early this year argued that this labor shortage and high inflation is temporary. But these days, U.S. Federal Reserve acknowledges that thanks to a disrupted global production chain and a very strong demand for all goods and services, the higher inflation and labor shortage could be more persistent than expected earlier. So I would say the labor shortage will be extended to the summer of next year.
I see. Professor Yang, you mentioned that the impact of the labor shortage would impact industries in very different ways. Having said that then, what are the prospects for the IT industry as well as that of battery?
Okay, well, IT industry, they have been hit a lot by increases in demand because people are telecommunicating from home. But Korea has a long-term problem with getting enough people for the IT industry and the battery industry, especially battery industry, because, well, these are relatively high-skilled jobs. You need a lot of technical training, and the Korean universities right now cannot keep up with that demand for these technical workers. Partially, it's because the Korean university system is not geared to raise the number of these technical workers very quickly. Korean universities have strict limits on number of people that they can have in certain majors. They have strict limits on the total number of students that they can take. So it is almost impossible to increase the number of people in certain majors very quickly. Not only is there legal problems because the education department sets up these rules, education ministry sets up these rules, but also there's internal fight with the professors because if there's too few students in your department will be getting less budget, less attention, and they may even cancel your department. So these are very sensitive issues inside the university, and it's turning out to be a very sensitive political problem as well. It is fundamentally a long-term problem at the supply side. On the demand side, a lot of students do recognize that there is more demand for technical workers. They do want to get into that area, but they're also a bit nervous about that because, well, in the past, when there was a recession, or when there were some problems with companies, the first people that were let go were technical people. Some students are nervous about going into these technical areas. They have to start preparing from high school, and they think that going into a more business-oriented major is a safer bet in the long run. So these are type of problems that we have to address.
Has that also been the case with regard to the pandemic? Have we seen a shortage of technical workers? Were they first let go?
In the pandemic, less so, because the demand for the IT services had gone up during the pandemic because we are telecommunicating more, we're using more IT services, and during the pandemic, exports of Korea IT-related products went up for the same reasons. The other countries are using more IT products, so there has been more exports of semiconductors, computers, and so on. So at least for this time around, there has been an increase in demand for IT-oriented technical people.
Right, fortunately. Professor Kim, do you suppose then an immediate hike in wages and the expansion of perhaps work incentives will serve to perhaps solve the labor shortage in the near future?
If employers double the salaries, for example, they can successfully hire more people, but companies, particularly medium and small-sized companies, do not have enough resources to do that. And as we talked about, also the workers became less sensitive in working incentives, and over the pandemic there were serious changes in industrial structure. So workers more want something more robust and consistent jobs over changing economy and over maybe over another pandemic. So, for example, temporary workers in restaurants who serves the clients moved to motorbike delivery service because it is more flexible and more profitable. So, like this, there will be lots of movements between traditional jobs to new jobs, IT-related.
I see. I understand, Professor Kim, that this might be a very difficult question, but essentially, then, in your opinion, what are some fundamental ways to deal with the problem of labor shortage?
Well, I think there's two separate solutions. In the short run, we have to have more flexibility in importing labor from foreign countries. So I think that's the only way to supply more workers, particularly more labor-intensive industries like restaurants, hotels, and wedding halls, and so on. And in the long run, we have to improve the working quality for Korean workers through more experience and more education. So by doing that, we need less people in every production places. So that means our production procedure will be more integrated and more technical way. So that's the only way that we can handle the labor shortages.
Right.
I think it's worth pointing out that trying to use less workers, it's been a long-term trend. Because of the rapid rise in wages, especially minimum wages, there has been more automation in restaurants, in convenience stores. So in the long term, we will see less demand for unskilled workers. What's happening right now is that a lot of unskilled workers were additionally let go because of the coronavirus. This is a short-term problem. But now, because the demand is coming back, we want those unskilled workers to come back and work in restaurants and fields and so on, but they're not coming back partially because of the they still have problems with coronavirus. They still have some problems with childcare. They can go make better money elsewhere, for example, in delivery. But in the long term, the demand for unskilled workers are, I think, still going to continue to fall.
Right. Professor Yang, this is something that Professor Kim touched upon. There are critics who are calling for greater efforts to perhaps ease the red tape over the employment of foreign workers for the farming industry, for fisheries, as well as small and mid-sized factories, or even restaurants and cafes, as Professor Kim has mentioned. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that is absolutely necessary because, well, we've talked about the long-term demographic problems a lot. There will be less Korean people to fill these jobs, and if you look at other foreign countries which also have reduction in young people, demographic problems, they absolutely have to depend on foreign workers. And right now, Korea does have the lowest fertility rate at about 0.8% per women. They're trying to raise that, and some of it will come back, I think, after the coronavirus, but none of the advanced countries have a replacement rate of fertility 2.1. The best that they can do is around 1.8. I don't think Korea will be doing that well, maybe 1.2 or 1.5, which means that we will suffer from lack of workers. Most Koreans will not want to go into those unskilled jobs because, well, they're going to be investing in themselves. They're going to get education, trying to get better jobs. So a lot of these unskilled jobs are going to get unfulfilled unless we have foreign workers.
Right. Professor Kim, then, against that backdrop, some observers are saying that a full-day work week arrangement may serve as another alternative to the labor shortage. Do you agree?
I partially agree with that. It looks that it is a reasonable idea to dampen the shock from labor shortages in the long run. Because the young workers particularly are more interested in flexible working hours and the quality of the life. So if these 4 working days per week goes well, I think that can attract more workers to the working places. But this plan, I think, requires the structural changes in the working places. In other words, the workers should be improving their working quality. In economic terms, it is called productivity. So with only 4 working days, they need to produce same amount of goods and services in a single week. So for that purpose, they have to improve their working quality. Otherwise, the 4 working days per week plan is not something sustainable in the long run.
It might affect the economy negatively then.
Right.
All right, Professor Kim, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. Professor Yang, thank you very much for your insights. Right, we are now poised to usher in our 4th weekend amid efforts to transition into a new normal. So do seek to abide by simple prevention guidelines to allow for a sustainable advance out of pandemic restrictions. Have a good weekend. See you on Monday.